Do you believe a tissue can save a life? Not with medicine or magic, but with a few handwritten words from a stranger, on a cold, rainy day in Chicago. Before I share this touching story with you, if you believe in the power of kindness and that small acts of goodness still exist in our daily lives, please follow the Gentle Heart Stories channel. Every week, we bring you stories that touch the heart and help you rediscover your love for life. Once again, now, let's return to that quiet afternoon in the public library, where a young woman pulled a man from the edge of despair, with one small, unexpected act. This morning in Chicago, the city wore a heavy, dull gray coat. Raindrops splattered against the window of bus number 22. Where Emily sat curled up in the back row, her thin coat trembling with every gust of wind that slipped in as the door opened and closed. The 22-year-old, with hurriedly tied brown hair, her worn backpack resting on her lap, gazed thoughtfully at the cold, wet scene outside. A senior psychology student at the University of Chicago, Emily was familiar with mornings without coffee, afternoons spent hungry, and restless nights worrying about rent, textbooks, and nameless anxieties. She worked part-time at a small diner every evening, but in recent months, with fewer customers and shorter hours, her wages barely covered her upcoming bills. So, the public library near downtown was her perfect refuge, not just for knowledge, but for her soul. She didn't need to explain anything to anyone when she walked in. All she had to do was pass through the heavy wooden door that smelled of time, and let the warmth and silence embrace her. In there, no one cared what she wore, what she brought, or how much money she had in her wallet. In there, people like her, poor, lost, but hopeful, could always find some peace. The library had become a kind of ritual for Emily, especially on days like today, when the rain kept pouring down, weighing heavily on the hearts of all. The cold wind blew through every corner of the streets, making everyone rush, except for Emily. She chose to walk a long way from the bus stop, because she didn't have enough money for a transfer, and because she needed time to calm herself after receiving a call from her landlord telling her that if she didn't pay by next week, she would have to move out. Her hands were cold as she gripped the library door handle. But as soon as she pushed the door open, the warmth, the scent of old paper, and the soft rustling of pages felt like a whisper to her heart. Emily nodded to the familiar librarian and made her way to her favorite corner on the second floor, by the window, overlooking the park, now quiet and empty from the rain. She opened her backpack, pulled out her filled notebook, and the book on psychology of childhood trauma she had been reading but never finished. No one knew that Emily was going through one of the hardest periods of her life. But she still came to the library, not to escape, but to find a little light. She had always believed that if she understood human psychology, if she could truly heal the pain, one day, she could help others like herself, and little did she know, on that cold, rainy day, amid the quiet, melancholy atmosphere of the library, an accidental encounter would change her life forever. For Emily, the public library wasn't just a place full of books and knowledge, it was a quiet refuge, almost sacred, in a city that was cold and sometimes too busy to listen to a trembling soul. The second floor of the library, with its large windows and old wooden tables, was the most familiar corner to her. No one competed, no one disturbed. There, she felt as if all the worries outside were blocked out by the misty glass panes. Every time Emily stepped onto the wooden stairs, which creaked under her weight, she would let out a long breath, as if releasing the pressures, the unanswered questions, and the silent sorrows that she could never share with anyone. She often came here on days when she didn't have class, on evenings when there were no shifts, or when there was nowhere else to go without spending money. This place felt like a private room she didn't have to pay rent for, where she didn't need permission to stay as long as she wanted. The library had witnessed her crying quietly after receiving a low grade for not being able to study in time. It was also here that she had laughed to herself when she read a funny story in an old, worn-out book. Some days, when it got dark, the library staff had to remind her 3 times before she would finally get up and leave, because she had been so absorbed in the words, which seemed like the only escape from reality. One snowy night, Emily didn't have enough money to take a cab home, so she pretended to be working on an assignment and stayed until the library closed. Only then did she quietly walk back to her dorm, which was a few blocks away. Beneath her thin coat, she gripped her notebook tightly, the only thing that made her feel like she was still trying, still hoping. The library staff had long since grown familiar with the small girl, the one who always sat in the same spot. Usually with a personal water bottle and sometimes eating only a granola bar all day. But no one ever asked anything. Not because they were indifferent, but because Emily always radiated a quiet presence that made people hesitant to disturb her. She had a habit of journaling when her mind felt tired. Once, she wrote, "Everyone needs a place where they don't feel invisible. For me, it's this library." And perhaps, she didn't know that soon, this very place, this familiar little corner, would be where she would no longer just be a seeker of light, but also the one who would ignite a long cold heart. That afternoon, the rain fell in a steady rhythm like a sad song repeating endlessly. Outside, the trees shook in the wind, and raindrops pelted the misty glass window, reflecting the cold light of the gray sky. Emily was sitting by the second-floor window, reading a book on behavioral psychology, trying to concentrate despite her mind being clouded with worries about the upcoming exams and the tuition fees she still hadn't figured out how to pay. She looked up, intending to stretch a little, when her gaze unconsciously settled on a quiet figure across the room. An elderly man, gray-haired, wearing a long black coat and carefully polished leather shoes. He was sitting alone at a table near the end of the row, his hands clasped together, his back slightly hunched as if he was bearing some heavy burden. But it was his face, not his age, not his attire, that made Emily stop for a long moment. In the otherwise quiet space, his silence resonated strangely. He wasn't sobbing, he wasn't groaning. But the silent tears fell, running down his cheek, dripping onto his trembling hands, making the sorrow seem more heartbreaking than loud cries. There was something in his eyes, a pain that had been held back for far too long, as if it was breaking apart helplessly. Emily was a psychology student, she had studied depression, loss, and silent breakdowns. But no book had taught her how to move past the helpless feeling of seeing someone free-falling into sorrow, unable to ask, unable to help. She watched him secretly. Beside him was an open book, an old novel about the journey of a man who left everything behind to search for the meaning of life. The story seemed to reflect his own life, or perhaps, he was looking for an answer that life outside could not give him. People around continued to walk by, absorbed in their reading, flipping through books, typing on laptops. No one paid attention to him, and perhaps, he had become accustomed to that invisibility, but Emily was different. She couldn't turn the page she was reading. Her heart suddenly sank, as if an invisible thread was pulling her toward him, a stranger, yet not entirely unfamiliar. Because she knew the feeling of wanting to cry alone in a place where no one knew your name. She had once been the one sitting there, alone among rows of seats, hoping that someone, just one person, would see her and not turn away, and in that moment, Emily didn't know that this chance encounter, between a poor student and a stranger crying, would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them had ever expected. Emily wasn't the kind of person who easily ignored her feelings. Her emotions were always strong, like waves crashing toward the shore, unstoppable. She didn't need to know the man's whole story, but something inside her told her she couldn't just walk away. The feeling was hard to describe, both a reminder and a strong urge from the bottom of her heart: do something. She knew the feeling of wanting to scream, but being unable to. The feeling of wanting to find a way to release the sorrow that weighed heavy in her heart, but not knowing where to start. She had once had days like that, standing in the midst of a crowd, surrounded by laughter and joy, but feeling as if she were the last person on earth. Whenever that happened, she would come to the library, a place where no one asked why, no one needed an explanation, where there was only silence and pages ready to absorb all her emotions. She didn't want him to suffer alone. She could see the loneliness in his eyes, something distant, weary. She didn't know what he was going through, but those eyes spoke everything. In that moment, it felt as though there was an invisible connection between them. Even though no words were spoken, Emily stood up without thinking long. She walked past the tables, her steps soft, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a bit anxious, as if what she was doing was an intrusion into his private space. But then, as she drew closer, she realized that his eyes weren't looking up. He still had his head down, lost in a sorrow that no one could see. A feeling of helplessness rose inside her. But she couldn't stop. Under the soft yellow lights of the library, Emily gently placed a tissue on the table in front of him. She didn't say anything, she simply wrote a few lines, the words she knew he needed to hear, words that could give him some strength, however small. I don't know what's going on, but please don't give up. Sometimes, a bad day is just the beginning of something better. She left without looking back, not expecting a thank you or any response. Everything felt like a small act of kindness, a random connection in a silent moment. And even though she didn't know it, Emily had done something big, bringing a small light to the dark night of his life. She stepped out of the library, feeling lighter, as if she had done something right. But no one knew that the meeting between her and him was the first step toward a change neither of them had realized. Emily didn't look back, didn't wait for any response. She simply quietly left the corner of the library and walked out through the automatic doors, leaving behind the peaceful space, a bit of kindness, and a tissue with emotional words. Her heart felt lighter, and part of her felt as if she had completed something right. She didn't need to know what the man would do with the tissue or whether he would read her words of encouragement. But at least, she had done what her heart told her to do. As for him, the stranger, after months of suffering, for the first time in a long time, he felt that someone cared about him. A stranger, who didn't ask questions, didn't know his name, didn't know why he sat there crying, simply sending a message of understanding and hope. When he looked down at the tissue, his hands trembled. His eyes, no longer clouded with sadness, now reflected a mixture of surprise and emotion. He quietly read each word on it, feeling the sincerity and gentleness that the young girl had written. Her words, though simple, carried great power. Sometimes, a bad day is just the beginning of something better. It was a reminder of the days gone by, when he had thought he couldn't go on, that the waves of life were too strong for him to stand against. But today, through those simple words, he began to feel a flicker of light in the darkness that he had carried for so long. The man held the tissue in his hand, a warm feeling rising in his heart. Maybe, not everything had ended. Maybe, a change was still possible. He didn't know who the girl was, but in that moment, he felt that he wasn't the only person in the world, at least not in Emily's eyes. That feeling, even if it lasted only a moment, made his heart feel lighter, as if the storm inside him had eased a little, he looked out the library window, where the rain still fell, but the warm light from the lamps reflected through the water, making the space feel cozier. Even though the outside world was gloomy, inside, a small light was beginning to shine. And perhaps, he wouldn't have to continue on this dark road alone. After leaving the library, Emily didn't know that her small act had changed something profound in the man's heart. She didn't need a thank you, didn't need recognition. She just did what her heart told her to do, as naturally as she had always lived. The feeling that she had helped someone, even a little, was enough to bring her peace. She never thought that the man might be a special figure, an anonymous billionaire, who would change her life later. As for him, after reading Emily's words, he placed the tissue down on the table. A strange feeling, like a gentle wave, swept over his soul, making it impossible for him to stop thinking about it. Those words were like a dose of spiritual medicine. Not because they solved his problems, but because they reminded him that, no matter how bad life got, sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. He sat there, holding the tissue, feeling each word Emily had written. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely invisible. In recent days, he had lived in the darkness of himself, trying to hide his pain, even though he was surrounded by wealth and power. But now, that feeling was like a ray of light, shining into the hidden corners of his heart. The feeling that he still had value, that someone understood him, even if it was a stranger. He stood up, looking out the library window. The rain still fell, but inside him, a little hope had begun to grow. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he began to feel that he could keep going. His gaze, when he looked at the raindrops running down the glass, no longer felt heavy. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. Emily might never know that her action had changed the life of a man who once thought everything was over. She might not understand that the words she wrote on that tissue weren't just encouragement, but a small torch lighting the dark path of a man she might never meet again. But that small act, invisible to the world, had the power to make someone no longer feel like the lonely, invisible one, and so, in a quiet library in Chicago, amidst the pouring rain, a chance moment became a turning point in both their lives. Victor Harrington, at the age of 67, is one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in Chicago. He is known as a symbol of success in the business world. The conglomerate he owns not only has a significant influence in the biotechnology industry but also holds valuable real estate in the city's most prime locations. His decisions impact thousands of people, and his career is a testament to intelligence and skill in the financial world. Over the past 3 decades, he has built an empire from scratch. From his early days with a small biotechnology company, he has risen to become one of the most visionary investors. His conglomerates have not only elevated the biotechnology industry but also contributed to the growth of the entire economy. These successes have placed him at the pinnacle of society, earning admiration and respect from all. However, behind the image of success, Victor has always faced hidden fears that no one knows about. He is a lonely man in a bustling world where everyone only sees the exterior and never understands the emotional state of someone who has everything but feels empty and emotionally deprived. Victor never imagined that one day his life would unravel like this. Janet, the wife he had loved all his life, passed away after a sudden illness, leaving a void in his heart that could never be filled. Janet was not only the perfect life partner but also the only one who understood the pressures Victor faced in his work. Together, they built a family, overcame all challenges, and lived happily. But now, his life was just an emptiness. There were no more laughs from Janet, no more evening conversations. Everything changed abruptly, and he didn't know how to move forward. In addition to losing his wife, another source of pain came from his only son, David. David, whom Victor had always hoped to pass his legacy on to, cut ties with him after a major argument about how to run the company. Their relationship had been strained for a long time due to business disagreements, but the argument over how to manage the conglomerate marked the end of their father-son relationship. Victor couldn't understand how David could betray him, leaving him when all he wanted was for his son to take over and preserve the family's legacy. Unanswered phone calls and unread letters all made Victor feel as if he had lost his entire family. Victor felt that there was no reason to continue living. The successes in his career now only made him feel emptier than ever. Without a wife, without a son, and surrounded by people only concerned with money and fame, no one truly cared about him as a person. Everything had become a long chain of failures and losses. After his wife's death and the breakdown of his relationship with his son, Victor no longer knew what to do with his life. The days passed, and he wandered aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, no longer desiring anything. He no longer cared about his work or wanted to meet anyone. His assistants and lawyers continuously tried to contact him, but Victor avoided them, no longer wanting to attend any meetings. He wanted to escape everything. Even himself. One of the places Victor often visited was the public library, where he could sit alone in peace, free from demands or the presence of others. In those moments, he just wanted quiet, not having to think about work, his family, or anything else. The library became a place where he found the small solace in the silent world of books. For Victor, walking through familiar streets, stopping by coffee shops or the library, was the only way he could find peace. He had no clear destination, just going somewhere to escape the noise and relationships he no longer wanted to maintain. Everything around him was just faded shadows, nothing could make him happy again. One day, while sitting at the corner of the library, Victor felt like he had no reason to hold on to this world anymore. In his hand was a resignation letter he had prepared long ago, a letter to give up all positions in his companies. He had decided that he would no longer attend any meetings, no longer make any decisions. He felt exhausted and didn't want to bear any more responsibilities. It was a decision he had thought about carefully and truly felt he no longer had the strength to continue. Victor knew that with this decision, he would lose everything: fame, power, wealth, everything he had spent his life building. But at that moment, all those things had become meaningless to him. What he once saw as motivation to live now only felt like burdens he could no longer carry. He sat there, looking out the library window, feeling like he was trapped in a world where no one could understand him. Even though he had everything people dreamed of, he still felt lacking a wife, lacking a son, and lacking faith in life. While sitting in the library, quietly gazing at the book pages without truly reading, Victor accidentally came across a tissue that someone had left on the table. At first, he thought it was just a discarded item, but when he picked it up and read the hurriedly written lines on it, his heart suddenly stirred. The words were nothing special, not finely crafted or eloquent. Just a few simple lines, but they carried an oddly sincere message: I don't know what's going on, but please don't give up. Sometimes a bad day is just the beginning of something better. Victor felt a strange sensation rise in his chest. It was the feeling of genuine concern, of someone writing words of encouragement without knowing anything about him. This feeling, the feeling of kindness with no expectation of return, made him stop, silencing all the negative thoughts in his mind. He wondered, who would write such words for a stranger? And why have I never done this for anyone? After reading the words on the tissue, Victor couldn't stop thinking about them. Those simple yet sincere words felt like an awakening in his mind. He couldn't understand why a stranger would take the time to write such encouraging words for someone completely unknown to them. The kindness, the concern, made him feel something stir in his heart. Thousands of people knew his name, millions had heard of his career, but no one had ever written him a simple word of encouragement like that. Victor sat still, his heart suddenly filled with an indescribable feeling. He had lived a life full of meetings, agreements, numbers, and strategies. He had made countless decisions that affected thousands of people. But now, at this moment, he realized that there were things more important than money or fame. A hug, a sincere word, a kind gesture, these simple things could change a person's life. The question kept repeating in his mind, why have I never done this for anyone? Why have I never paid attention to those around me? Those who need a word of encouragement, a little care. His heart suddenly tightened. Even though he had achieved everything in life, Victor felt he was missing the most important thing: humanity, sharing, and kindness. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the tissue with Emily's words, and wondered if he could change anything. Could he change the way he lived, to not only live for himself but also for others, those who needed help but sometimes couldn't speak up? These questions lingered in his mind throughout that afternoon, preventing him from leaving the library, even though he had long decided to give up everything. For the first time in months, Victor felt truly awake. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. At Gentle Heart Stories, we share tales of compassion, change, and valuable life lessons. Be a part of this loving community and help us spread positive messages. The next day, Victor couldn't stop thinking about the tissue. He woke up very early, with no intention of going to the office or meeting partners as usual. Instead, he drove to the library where he had met Emily the day before. This time, he wasn't there to avoid anyone, not to dodge his assistants or lawyers. His sole purpose was to find the girl who had written him those simple but powerful words of encouragement. As he entered the library, his feelings were completely different from his usual visits. Everything around him seemed smaller, simpler, and more peaceful. Victor sat in the old chair where he had first seen Emily. The old wooden tables, the towering bookshelves, and the dim light filtering through the glass windows. He looked at the people coming and going from the library. One by one, hoping to spot the familiar silhouette of the girl. But no, she wasn't there. He felt disappointed but didn't give up. He decided to stay until she returned. The library was quieter today, and Victor could clearly feel the silence enveloping him. He didn't know what exactly he was searching for, but there was a strange feeling urging him not to leave. Something in his heart wouldn't let him give up. He wanted to see Emily again, not to repay her, but because he felt he needed to understand himself better, to understand what made him feel alive after so many years lost in fame and wealth. Not finding Emily in the library, Victor decided to ask the librarian. The librarian, a middle-aged woman, looked at him with curiosity in her eyes. He asked about the girl who had left the tissue the day before. Unfortunately, the librarian couldn't help him much. She only remembered that a young student often came here to read books. However, she didn't know the girl's name and didn't know much about her, except that she was a normal student who rarely interacted with anyone. Victor felt more lost than ever. He requested to review the security camera footage from the library, hoping to find some clue about the girl. The library staff agreed, and for the next few hours, they went through the footage. But once again, there was nothing clear. Everyone recognized the girl but no one could say anything specific about her. The only detail was that she seemed to visit the library often, usually picking old books, and rarely interacting with anyone. There was no further useful information. Victor began to feel exhausted, but the strange urge still wouldn't leave him. It seemed like that tissue had created a hole in his soul, and he couldn't be at peace until he found the girl. Throughout this search, he never considered the possibility that the girl might just be a simple person who happened to meet him and wrote those encouraging words as a human gesture. His mind was focused solely on finding and meeting Emily, as he felt that was the only way to fill the emptiness in his heart. During the search, Victor began to notice the people around the library. The conversations were initially strange to him. He was so used to communicating in business settings, but he had never had a simple conversation, unrelated to money, fame, or any deal. One day, while sitting in the reading area, he accidentally overheard a conversation between two people. A middle-aged man was talking about his life, the hardships and failures he had gone through. A woman sitting nearby also joined the conversation, sharing her pain after losing a loved one. Victor was surprised to realize he was listening to their story with genuine interest, with no other intention but to share in their feelings. This was something he had never done in his life. In his world, everything had to have a purpose, a clear benefit. But now, he was beginning to feel the value of listening, of understanding the ordinary people around him. And the strange thing was, he didn't feel lonely anymore. He realized that the stories of ordinary people had a tremendous power. They didn't need wealth or fame, but their sincerity and kindness could change a life. Each story carried a lesson, a message he had never paid attention to before. The people he had once dismissed now became more important than ever. And in those stories, he began to find a part of himself, a part that had been buried under work and career. Victor felt like he was stepping into a completely new world. In the past, everything around him revolved around work, meetings, contracts, business partners. But now, he found himself drawn into conversations with ordinary people, with no power or influence. These people didn't need to achieve anything except living their lives kindly, with love and sincerity. And that was what made him feel strange. Perhaps these people had something he had missed for so many years, peace and happiness from simple things. He no longer sought perfection in work but began to search for tranquility in his soul. A word of encouragement, a simple act could bring joy and peace to a person, without the need for material wealth or power. Victor realized that his life had never truly been complete. Despite having everything anyone could dream of, he still felt something important was missing, that connection with people, the sharing of feelings, and genuine concern for those around him. The more he searched, the more he heard stories that made him reflect. An elderly woman talked about her grandchildren, poor children who had to walk miles to get to school. An unemployed man shared his difficulties in not being able to support his family. And there were countless other stories, stories that seemed small but contained so many emotions and hopes. These stories awakened something in Victor's soul. He realized that he had lived too long in a world focused only on success, money, and fame. But now, he realized that simple things, true emotions, were what mattered most in life. A week had passed since Victor began his search. Every day, he returned to the library, hoping to see Emily again. But so far, she had not appeared. However, something miraculous happened on a weekend afternoon. As Victor was climbing the stairs, he saw a familiar figure. Emily, the girl he had been searching for all week, was sitting in the corner of the upper floor of the library, reading an old book. She didn't know anyone was looking for her, but Victor recognized her immediately. His heart raced, and he felt like he was standing at an important crossroads in his life. This time, there was no exhaustion or disappointment, only a strong feeling that he had to meet her, not to repay her, but because he felt there was a new mission in his life. One day unlike any other, Victor ascended the stairs of the library with a strange sense of unfamiliarity. Today, he had decided not to hesitate any longer. After observing the young woman who had left him the tissue with words of encouragement he couldn't forget, he knew that now was the time to step out of the shell he had created for himself over the years. As he walked past the old bookshelves and the people engrossed in their reading, his gaze stopped at Emily, who was sitting in the corner, flipping through an old book she loved. Victor's heart raced as he saw her, and in that moment, a thought crossed his mind: this is the girl who changed my life. She is the only one who saw me without noticing my wealth or power. He walked closer, slowly but with determination. When he stood near her, he gently spoke, "I'm sorry, but are you the one who gave me the tissue the other day?" Emily looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected an older man like him to approach her just because of a tissue. She awkwardly nodded and smiled shyly. "You still remember?" Her question rang out with a hint of surprise, but it was gentle and sincere. She didn't understand why he remembered her, but her curiosity made it impossible not to ask. At that moment, the space around them seemed to fall silent, with only their breathing echoing in the air. Emily smiled softly, then looked into Victor's eyes. At first, she thought he was just a stranger who had coincidentally met her and left an impression of politeness. But now, looking at his face, she saw seriousness and an unfamiliar emotion in his eyes. She couldn't help but ask again, "You still remember?" Victor looked at her, and a gentle feeling swept over him. He couldn't understand why. But clearly, this meeting had made him feel as if he had found a warm flame in the dark. Emotions he had never shared with anyone now, for some unknown reason, wanted to pour out. "You wrote very special words for me," Victor said, his voice a bit choked, "and those words made me reconsider my life." Emily looked at him, her gaze soft and sincere. "I didn't think a small piece of encouragement could have such a big impact," she said. "It's just something simple I've done since I was young, writing to strangers when they seem to need a little light in their lives." Victor stared at her for a long time, feeling the gentleness in each of her words. She didn't judge him, but simply listened and shared in such a natural way. It was this sincerity that made something stir inside him. He felt that he had met the person he needed, the only one who could help him rediscover the humanity he had forgotten over the years. The conversation began to feel lighter as they both found comfort in sharing their thoughts and personal stories. Emily told Victor about why she chose psychology. She wasn't an outstanding person or a particularly gifted learner, but she always felt a special connection with the people around her. She explained that from a young age, she had realized that not everyone could find encouragement from those close to them. That was why she always wanted to write words of encouragement for strangers, even if it was just on a piece of tissue, a small note, hoping it might change their mood, even if only a little. Victor listened to her, unable to take his eyes off her. Emily's words made him feel the purity and sincerity in her, something he hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. She wasn't seeking benefit or recognition from others, she simply wanted to make the world around her better. A warm feeling arose in his heart. For the first time in many years, he felt that he was talking to someone not for any ulterior motive but for a genuine connection. Emily's story reminded Victor of his own childhood. He hadn't been born into luxury, but life had gradually swept him into the vortex of ambition and power. He had once had simple dreams and longed for a peaceful life, but now, he had forgotten them. Everything had changed when he began chasing money and fame, and in the process, he lost himself. Emily, with her stories of simple and kind-hearted living, made him feel as though he was seeing himself from the past. The conversation gradually shifted as Victor, for the first time, opened up to Emily. He was no longer the billionaire, no longer the one standing at the top of power. He was just an old man sitting in the library, sharing the story of his life with a young woman he had just met. "My life hasn't always been this way," he began, his voice lowering. "I used to be a young man full of dreams, but gradually, I got swept up in work, in successes and failures. I don't even remember how I changed, but I know I became someone else, someone I sometimes don't even recognize." He looked into Emily's eyes, seeing sincerity in them. "I've lived too long in the shadow of fame and money. I forgot that there are more important values in life, things that can't be bought, things that can't be measured by money." Emily listened without a word of judgment. She simply sat there, with a gentle smile, asking for nothing more than to let Victor share what was on his mind. She didn't know who he was, but her listening presence made Victor feel lighter than ever. As Victor continued to talk about his life, his mistakes, the things he had missed, and the losses along his long journey, Emily sat quietly, not saying a word. She didn't know who he was, didn't know he was a famous billionaire, but her presence, her understanding of the words he spoke, was exactly what Victor needed most at that moment. It was her presence, her empathy towards his words, that made the bitterness rise in his heart. But this time, his tears weren't tears of despair. He cried for something new, for a release, for a peace he had never felt in many years. The deep emotions within him were being freed, and he felt as if he was being born again. When the conversation ended, Emily prepared to leave, and she placed a new tissue on the table, just like last time. But this time, the note was different. "Life is still waiting for you to write its final chapters, don't let it end on a sad page." Victor looked at those words, and once again, he felt his heart stir. It wasn't just an encouragement, but a powerful message about hope and the possibility of change. Emily stood up, not saying anything else, just offering a gentle smile before leaving the library. Victor sat back, the tissue still in his hand, but now, it was no longer just a lifeless object. It had become a symbol, a reminder that life could change, and he still had the opportunity to write his own story. After the emotional conversation with Emily, Victor felt a profound change in his soul. He no longer wanted to sink into the darkness of wealth and power. Instead, the meeting had opened up a new path for him, one that led to understanding and humanity, something he had neglected for many years. Upon returning to the company, he decided to change his approach to work and leadership. He had always been decisive, somewhat cold, and had always placed the company's interests above all else. But now, Victor began to pay more attention to those around him, not just shareholders and business partners, but his employees, the people he had once seen merely as tools to achieve his goals. He transformed his leadership style from a command and control approach to one of listening and empathy. He began to spend more time talking to his employees, understanding their lives and the difficulties they were facing. This change not only brought improvements to the company but also created a more comfortable work environment where people could openly share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. Victor felt a clear transformation within himself, and it made him feel prouder of who he was, even though no one knew where this change had come from. Although he had changed, Victor could not forget Emily and the conversation that had opened a new door for him. The feeling of regret for not being able to help her immediately haunted him. He decided to learn more about Emily, not out of curiosity, but because he wanted to do something to help her, just as she had helped him rediscover a part of his humanity. Therefore, he asked one of his trusted employees to investigate Emily's background. Soon, he learned some details about her. Emily was a psychology student at a prestigious university, but her family's situation was extremely difficult. She was the only child in a poor family, and her parents were hardworking laborers who couldn't support her studies. When he discovered that Emily was facing a huge tuition debt and had to work extra hours to make ends meet, Victor felt a deep sorrow in his heart. He remembered the time when he had also gone through struggles. Though not like Emily's, but the feeling of worrying about money and the future was never easy. And then, he decided that he could not let this girl struggle alone, just as he had once done. Victor didn't want to make Emily feel embarrassed or indebted to him, so he decided to help her in the most discreet way possible. He created an anonymous scholarship for students in difficult circumstances but with excellent academic records, like Emily. The scholarship was enough to cover her entire tuition for the upcoming academic year, and it would even relieve her from worrying about finances. But he didn't stop there. Victor also funded a project he was passionate about, a psychological therapy center for people in difficult situations, where students like Emily could intern and learn. To make the gift even more meaningful, he attached an internship opportunity at this center for Emily, an opportunity she could never have had without his help. All of this was done secretly, with no mention of his name. The announcements about the scholarship and internship opportunity were sent to Emily via letter and email, leaving her unaware that a stranger, a billionaire, was behind all these good things. She only felt extremely surprised and grateful for the opportunity she had received, but she never thought that Victor was the one who had changed her life. She just believed that it was a rare stroke of luck life had given her. When Emily received the letter about the scholarship and internship, she couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't understand why she had received such a generous gift. She had always been accustomed to fending for herself, but now, when the opportunity came unexpectedly, she felt as though she were living in a dream. She couldn't know that this gift came from Victor's kindness, the man she had met once in the library. Emily just thought that this was an extraordinary stroke of luck life had prepared for her. Her surprise grew even more when she realized that this scholarship not only alleviated her financial burden but also opened the door to an internship opportunity at a renowned psychological therapy center. She saw this as her only chance to learn, practice, and develop her skills. This made her more determined to study and work even harder. She didn't want to miss this great opportunity, and she wanted to be worthy of what life had given her. While Emily was enjoying these new opportunities, Victor also continued to think about how he could help others like her. He wanted to create a project that could continue spreading love and sharing, just like the words of encouragement he had received from her. And from that, the White Tissue Project was born, a charity project he funded, where people could send small yet meaningful messages to those going through tough times in life, especially those facing mental crises. This project was not only a way to help others but also a way for Victor to express his gratitude and repay the encounter with Emily. He hoped that through these loving messages, people would feel that they were not alone in life. The White Tissue Project became an important part of Victor's life, and he dedicated much time to following and supporting it. Every message of encouragement sent out made him feel like he was contributing to making the world a warmer place. Although no one knew about his actions, Victor quietly visited the library once a week, just to watch Emily read. He never approached her, never disturbed her, but only stood from afar and observed. Each time he saw her engrossed in her book, he felt a peace he had never experienced before. She was the symbol of hope and kindness in a world that could sometimes be cold and cruel. On late afternoons, when the library lights began to dim, he would still sit in a corner. Occasionally seeing Emily lift her book, her eyes shining with the light of knowledge and hope. That was when Victor felt like he was reclaiming the humanity he had lost during all the years of chasing money and power. And in his heart, he knew that, even though no one knew about what he had done, it was these small actions that were the significant steps in his journey to rediscover himself. It was a special day for Emily. After years of hard work and overcoming obstacles, she had finally graduated from college with a degree in psychology. The feeling of happiness as she stood on stage, looking out at the crowd and reflecting on the difficult journey she had gone through, made her heart swell with pride. But what made that day even more special was the invitation to speak at a mental health conference, a major event in Chicago that brought together many experts, researchers, and professionals in the field of psychology. Emily had declined many invitations before, but this time, when she was invited to participate in the conference, she felt it was an opportunity to share her story, to let others know that not everyone has a perfect life, and that anyone can overcome life's challenges if they have enough faith. With encouragement from her family, friends, and those who had helped her along the way, Emily stepped onto the stage with a strong heart. She realized that life is not always fair, but if we learn to appreciate the small things and have faith in change, we can find the strength to rise. During her speech, Emily shared with the audience a story she always kept in her heart, the story of the white tissue paper on which she wrote words of encouragement for the stranger in the library. She told about how she left those words of encouragement on the tissue for a person who was desperate, never knowing that it would be a turning point in her life. She didn't know that that tissue had changed a person's life, a billionaire she could never have imagined. As she recounted the story, she couldn't have guessed that Victor, the man, was sitting in the front row, listening intently to every word she said. His eyes were red, and his hands were clenched as he remembered the days of despair he had gone through before meeting Emily. Her words of encouragement on that tissue had been a light in the darkest moments of his life. Victor recalled the moment he felt like he was standing on the edge, unsure whether he could continue living a meaningful life. And that very tissue had pulled him out of the darkness. When the ceremony ended, Emily was preparing to leave the stage when, unexpectedly, Victor stepped forward. All eyes were on him, the elegant man in the black suit with silver hair. Now walking decisively, as if he could no longer contain his emotions. Emily looked at him, bewildered and not understanding what was happening. Before she could say anything, Victor hugged her tightly, leaving her a little confused. In that embrace, he whispered, "Thank you for saving me," a billionaire who seemed to have everything, yet lost all faith in kindness. Emily stood still, shocked and moved. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. The man she had thought was an unknown person, who had sat with her in the library, was now a billionaire, and moreover, he said she had saved him. These words were a wake-up call, making Emily clearly realize that this life never lacks miracles. And once again, she understood that small acts can change a life, whether it's a tissue or just a sincere hug. The story of Emily and Victor quickly spread throughout the United States. It became a vivid example of the power of kindness and transformation. The media constantly mentioned this story, and people from all over were moved by the human connection between a young girl and a billionaire. The story not only touched the hearts of Americans but also created a positive wave, encouraging people to pay more attention to mental health and the importance of small acts of kindness in everyday life. Their story also made many people believe that, no matter how difficult life may be, one kind act, no matter how small, can change a person's fate. Victor's hug, the tissue Emily wrote her words of encouragement on, and their determination to never give up created an inspiring story, leaving everyone who heard it in tears. moved by their own story, Emily and Victor decided to collaborate and establish a charity called White Tissue. This foundation was set up to help those facing mental crises. Those who felt lost and didn't know where to turn. The foundation would provide necessary emotional support, helping people through the most difficult times in their lives. The foundation's operating model is simple yet highly effective. Through an online platform, people can send anonymous kind messages and words of encouragement to those who need help. Every message brings hope and encouragement, helping those in need feel they are not alone. The project quickly attracted public attention and became a phenomenon, with millions of kind messages from around the world. On a warm and gentle weekend day, when the atmosphere in Chicago was calm, people could still find the white tissue framed in the corner of the old library where Emily and Victor had first met. That tissue was not just a keepsake, but also a symbol of hope and kindness. On the tissue, the words were brief but meaningful: "A bad day doesn't mean a hopeless life." These words were not only a comfort for those facing difficulties, but also a reminder that no matter how bad life gets, there is always a chance to start anew, from a small and sincere act in life. Small but powerful stories can change the world. The story of Emily and Victor is proof that a kind act, whether it's a white tissue, a word of encouragement, or a sincere hug, can save a soul. Sometimes, the simplest things bring the greatest meaning, making us realize that each of us can change the world with kindness and care for others. And when the story of Emily and Victor came to an end, they not only left a mark in everyone's hearts but also created a wave of change, lighting up the flames of hope in this world. Together, they founded the White Tissue Foundation, turning kind messages into a bridge to help those who are lost, regardless of their circumstances or struggles. Their journey was not only a touching story of salvation, but also a reminder that in each of us, there is the ability to bring about change, even if it's small but meaningful. But this story does not end here. It continues to spread, and now it's time for each of us in this community to contribute to the shared story. Each of us can be the light, the one who brings hope, whether through words, small actions, or genuine care. If you feel inspired by this story, don't hesitate to join the journey of spreading kindness. Leave kind messages for people you've never met. Together, we can create a world full of love and understanding. Join the Gentle Heart Stories channel, where each story is an invitation to kindness and kind actions. Share your story with us, and together, let's make the world a warmer place, one tissue, one word, one small but meaningful act at a time. We believe these stories will change your life, and the lives of those around you. Start today. Gentle Heart Stories, where every story can be the beginning of a great change.